So the question is, can you imagine? That's not the title, it's just a question. I like to start with questions because I say if you start with questions, it hooks the audience. Are you hooked?
Yep.
Okay. So, yeah, can you imagine? As you can tell, we're going to talk about imagination, right? And I think this is going to be very interesting. Some people, one time we're having this discussion with friends, and I was saying, especially if you speak different languages, I asked them, can you translate imagination in your own language? Like, is it possible? And what we found, of course, this is not of all languages. Some languages are older than others, more mature, and they have the vocabulary for it. But most languages actually stop at thoughts, right? The translation for imagination would be thought, right? But as you can see, thought and imagination is not the same thing. So that means a lot of people, if that's the language that you speak, then that means you have a limited understanding to what imagination is, especially if that was your first language, right? It was not like presented to you culturally. It was not a concept that you understood growing up. So yeah, what is imagination? Let's see. It says in the dictionary that imagination, actually, I'd like to hear what you guys think. What's imagination? Who has a thought?
Seeing something that.
No answers from the back.
Imagining things that are not real.
He said imagining things that are not real. Okay. Anyone else?
Something in my mind.
Huh?
Create something in my mind.
Creating something in your mind. Okay. Anyone else? Being delusional. Oh, wow. It says being delulu, she said. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Planning ahead. Okay. Okay. Planning ahead.
I'm tempted to say imagining is thinking about something positively.
Okay. Thinking about something positively. Okay. So are you saying you cannot have negative imaginations?
I feel like imagining is thinking over and over again about something positive that you want, for instance, to happen in the future.
Okay.
And then something like ruminating or, would be negative. So I tend to imagine in a positive light.
Okay, that's good.
I think it's creating with your thoughts.
Creating with your thoughts. Okay, so you're using your thoughts in your imagination. That's good. Anyone else?
Thoughts that draw a picture.
Thoughts that draw a picture. Okay. Anyone else?
Visualizing a world.
Visualizing a world. Wow. Okay. Like a planet or like. Okay. Visualizing. Anyone else? Barry, what do you think imagination is?
Creativity.
Creativity. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. Anyone else?
Maybe it's something related to more to do with the future. Trying to predict the future.
Okay, predict the future. Okay, good. Anyone else? Who wants to try? Anyone who feels like I have not given the opportunity to speak? Okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go. Brian, what do you think imagination is?
My imagination is creating a scenario of something that hasn't happened but is yet to happen.
Hasn't happened. Okay, this is good. Okay. Josh. Oh, no, I'm not going to ask those guys. But anyway, this is interesting because all of you have given answers of what imagination is, and it is all those things and so much more, right? All those things and so much more. By definition of the dictionary, it would say something like it's the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts or external objects not present to the senses. Okay, so it's creating things that are not material. Okay, and then it says it's the ability of the mind to be creative and resourceful. Right? It's the ability. So imagination is a faculty and an action. It's also an ability. Okay, and it's also a part of the mind. It says a part of the mind that imagines things. That's also the imagination. You can look at it as an ability, a faculty, and a part of the mind. And I think all those definitions are correct, plus what you've said. An imagination is is a nation. It's big. It has everything, right? And even someone said concerning the future, but you know what? Even concerning the past, if I tell you, remember your childhood, what are you gonna use? Imagine, because you can't go back. You can describe the house that you grew up in because you have an imagination. Do you understand? So imagination extends beyond experiences, present, past, and future. Okay, you can use your imagination to think about the past, think about the present, create things in the future, go where you've never been. With your imagination, you can go to Latvia, for example, even though you don't know what it looks like, or Lithuania, or Greece, or Congo, or Panama. You can go to these places because you have an imagination, right? And I think it's interesting. I feel like God gave us an imagination for a very particular reason. And that's what I want us to understand today. Ironically, one of the greatest proponents of the power of imagination was a scientist who oftentimes you'd think that, okay, science has nothing to do with imagination. Science deals with facts. But I think that's wrong, right? Because imagination is applicable everywhere and anywhere. You can imagine anything and in any field, okay? Look at what Albert Einstein said. He said that, before even that, because some people said imagining things that are not real, right? Is there a difference between imagination and fantasy?
A fantasy is imagination, but like Joanne said, it's actually, I think it's in the positive light. Or not, someone can have a bad fantasy, but to them it's, like a good one, like something good. I think people would put a positive connotation towards a fantasy.
Fantasy, okay. Anyone else with a thought? Okay.
I feel like imagination is an umbrella term that contains fantasy, because
Okay.
imagination could also be, as you said, like past or something that it happened.
Mhm.
We use imagination to go back to. But fantasy is like literally nothing.
Mm.
What is it? Kind of
Nothing. Okay, that's good. Okay, I'm glad to hear this. Anyone else with a thought? Fantasy. How do you translate that in your language? That's an interesting question. Right? So listen to this. Imagination or fantasy is an external focus on mood-altering scenarios and false realities. For example, imagining unicorns and things that act upon you from the outside to change your situation. I don't know if you understand. Imagination is what people who, fantasy is what people who've lost hope have, right? And the world of fantasy never materializes because you are subject to external factors acting on you to give you an outcome, right? So you're living from the outside in, okay, expecting an outcome. So it says, fantasy is an external focus on mood-altering scenarios and false realities that we use to gain relief from the prodding discomfort of emotional and spiritual desires, longings, and hopes. A fantasy is something that you hold on to as a comforting tool. It's a soother. It's like how a baby, they get these things and they put in their mouths. Although they have no nutritional value or benefit, they're there to soothe them from maybe some discomfort, right? Fantasies act in the same manner, okay? They take you out of your experience and they say things like, oh, I wish this could happen. I wish. But there is no responsibility or commitment to fulfilling whatever desire you want to have, okay? Imagination, on the other hand, if we're comparing the two, is an internal focus on the desires of the heart that lead to full living, okay? So imagination says, I desire to be here, and therefore I will be there. I'm not waiting on something else to act upon me or to influence my circumstances. In other words, I'm not a victim, okay? And he says, it is a courageous willingness to make visions of the heart's desires, our highest goal. And he says, imagination includes the knowledge that we may have pain in obtaining our desires, but that ultimately our desires are more powerful than our pain. Do you see? I don't know if, if you understood what I said. That when you have an imagination, you are not negating that there may be obstacles, but you are realizing that what you desire is far greater than whatever circumstances you may be in. Do you understand? You're recognizing that you are not limited in any way because of whatever shortcoming or whatever challenge may be before you. A fantasy, on the other hand, is wishing just that things would get better. But there is no commitment to that desire. There is no responsibility. There is no accountability. And so it remains a fantasy. Imagination is much stronger than that. Okay, so Albert Einstein said this, a scientist who was very, very convinced about the power of imagination. And he said that imagination is more important than knowledge. In other words, what your imagination can create is superior than knowledge. Why does he say that? He said that because for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand. Do you know that what you know is what you know? But it's not all that there is to be known. That's why you're learning every day. Do you understand? So knowledge is limited to what you know. If you're a medical student, you know medicine, you don't know engineering. But you could know, right? So it says that for knowledge is limited to all we know and understand. It says, while imagination embraces the entire world. And it says, and all there will ever be to know and understand. And imagination is not bound. It's not limited in any way. It's as broad as can be, okay? And so he says here, through imagination, people can explore the ideas of things that are not physically present, ranging from the familiar. If I say a thick slice of chocolate, cake, you can think about it and you can imagine it, even though it's not here. And he says, to the never experienced before, for example, an alien spacecraft appearing in the sky. Even in saying that, you've thought of something, even though you have never seen an alien spacecraft flying in the sky. Because imagination goes beyond what you know and what you're familiar with. Are we together? Yeah. Are we following? Yeah. Okay, good. So, let's continue. How do we continue? Okay, it's there, right? So, I was reading a certain article and I thought it was interesting because, you know, it's funny when what is in the scriptures is confirmed by science years later. I find it fascinating that a scientist did a study and in 2018 discovered what was written thousands of years before. Okay? So look at this. This is 2018, December 10th. How many of us were alive 2018, December 10th? Yes. Come on, guys. From the University of Colorado, they said this. It says, new brain imaging shows that imagining a threat lights up similar regions as experiencing it does. We're getting into a bit about what the imagination can do. He says when you imagine threats, you have the same brain reaction, neurological reaction, as someone who's experiencing it. So if I tell you, imagine yourself jumping into the sea 5 a.m. in the morning. What you imagine creates the same experience as someone who's actually jumping into the sea, right? And he says it suggests that imagination can be a powerful tool in overcoming phobias or past traumatic stresses. A scientific study, right? I think that's interesting, that they are coming to a conclusion after, I think, looking at 68 subjects, the study said, and coming up with this conclusion. And he says statistically, real and imagined exposure to the threat were not different at the whole brain level, and imagination just worked as well. In other words, your brain doesn't know the difference between the things you imagine and the things that you experience. So if you imagine yourself Say right now you just ate, but you imagine yourself to be hungry. Your brain experiences what someone who's hungry is feeling. Do you understand? If you imagine yourself scared, your brain goes through the same neurological experiences as someone who's actually terrified. Do you understand? That's why I don't like horror movies. Okay? Because why do I want to see and conceive that someone is chasing me? And then when you go home, okay, you can't even turn on the lights, can't close your eyes because you're imagining things. And in imagining things, you're actually experiencing what that person, but the only thing is that that person was acting. Yeah, yeah, and you are not getting paid. And you're using your electricity like for no reason, right? Switch off the lights and sleep. Okay. And it says here that previous research has shown that imagining an act can activate and strengthen regions of the brain involved in real-life execution. So interesting, because I told you once, and I think it's in this study too, that they took a group of boys and separated them and told one, you play the piano 2 hours a day. You imagine playing the piano 2 hours a day. At the end of the study, the brain functions were the same. And even it says here, for instance, imagine playing the piano can boost neurological connections in the region related to the fingers. That imagination has effects even on the outcome or on what you execute. And I think that's powerful. I think that's powerful. Are we together?
Yeah.
Are we imagining? And I think that's where I want to build on. The fact that your imagination eventually leads to some form of execution. And that's why it's so important that your imagination is set up the right way. Because if you are to imagine, if you understand the power of your imagination will eventually lead you to execute on what you've imagined, then you'll be a lot more careful in where your mind goes. Okay? Right. Let's go somewhere. Let's go to the Bible, right? 4,800 years ago, something happened, right? This is the Bible. And I want to read a story that kind of inspired this whole discussion. Okay? It's going to be in the Old English, so bear with me. But I think it communicates the message for today the best. So it says this in Genesis chapter 11, verse 1 to 8. The reason I'm saying 4,800 years ago is because it's estimated that this event took place 4,800 and something years ago, 69 years ago. He says, and the whole earth was of one language, okay, and of one speech. And it came to pass that as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. So it says, everyone spoke one language at the same time. And he says, and they said to one another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. Okay? So this is a community of people having a discussion. And he says, and they had a brick for stone and slime, and slime they had for mortar. And he says, and they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Okay? So just think about that. 4,800 years ago, a group of people come together and they say, hey, let's build a tower, a city, and in the city, a tower whose top will reach unto heaven. Okay, wait, I'll answer all the questions. I know some of you are like, what? That sounds crazy. How could they even imagine something like that? But listen, it says, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And he says, and the Lord, very, very important statement, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. Do you notice the tense there? That they are discussing, hey, let's build a tower. And in their discussion, the Lord takes notice and he says, oh, let's go down and see the city and the tower which the children of men have built. But where is the tower? Where is it? Why would you come to see something that doesn't exist? So then you read the next verse and it says, and the Lord said, behold, the people is one, speaking of unity, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and he says, now nothing, say nothing, will be restrained from them. And he says, which they have imagined to do. Don't you think that's profound? That a group of people who are speaking one language come together and say, hey, let's do this. And as soon as they say that, the Lord takes notice and said, I want to go and see the city and the tower that they have built. And then he makes a statement and says that the people is one. It says, now nothing will be restrained from them which they imagine to do. Emphasizing the power of imagination. That even God respects a determined mind. That when you make a resolve to say, I want to do this, whether good or bad, God respects it. Do you understand? Imagination is so powerful to take you where you have never been before physically. Do you understand? You know where your mind has not gone, you cannot go physically. Wherever you are, you said, oh, I'm going to manifest. Your mind came here and your body followed after. Do you understand? Where you have not imagined, where you have not thought, you will never go. Do you understand? There is no one place that you have never thought of, that you never thought of and gone. Can you mention one place that you didn't think of and you went? I challenge you. 10 euros on the line here. Because your mind goes ahead of you. But there's a duality to it. Because it's both good and bad. So if your mind has gone to dark places, your body will eventually end up in dark places. Do you understand? You will experience that thing that you created in your mind. Do you understand? So it's important to understand and to harness the power of imagination. Now let's just look at this a bit logically. These guys, 4,800 years ago, decided we are going to build a tower that reaches heaven. How far is heaven, guys? Let's talk. I think we have some engineers. How far is heaven?
Pretty far.
How far is heaven? Who can give me a number? Infinity is not a number. We can all say heaven is pretty far, right? But let's see what can we relate with, right? And sometimes when the Bible is speaking of heavens, it's speaking of the sky, the atmosphere, the moon, the stars, and beyond. Those are the heavens, the earth and the heavens, right? So I'm sure someone is imagining something else, but let's take that assumption that the heavens or the heaven is just what is not the earth, right? So I want you to see something here that I think is quite interesting. Are you able to see? Should you switch off the lights? Yeah. But how will they watch the video? But it's okay. They should come. They should be here in person. I think it's the other one. Yeah. Are you able to see the screen? This is the Earth's atmosphere. Okay. If you're wondering where you are somewhere like here. Right? And everything that mankind does is actually here. All the flying that you do, all the shopping that you do, all the complaining that you do, all the worrying that you do is here. Literally in the lowest part of the Earth's atmosphere. Like here. You know, have you ever been on a flight and you look down and like everything just shrinks and it seems insignificant? That's just here. The flights, or no flight you've taken has gone beyond this place. It says that the troposphere is the layer of the earth where all human activity takes place. Nothing that has ever happened on earth has happened beyond that layer. So that's interesting, right? Right? And then we have the stratosphere, which is 10 to 30 miles. It says the ozone layer lies within the stratosphere and absorbs the ultraviolet rays from the sun. So that's much higher, more than any regular human has been, and they have some monitoring tools there. And then we have the mesosphere. It says, studying the mesosphere is essential in understanding long-term changes in the Earth, in the atmosphere, and seeing how changes in climate and all these things, that scientists like to read, but that's another part, right? So we're still going up. And beyond that place, there is somewhere called the thermosphere, okay? And anything to do with satellites and all the stuff that give you internet, they're actually really, really high up in the sky, right? The weather satellites, the ISS, the International Space Station, there's actually 7 guys there at any given time. That's interesting, right? 7 guys. And then there's Hubble telescope, which is 370 miles up there. And beyond the thermosphere, there's something called the exosphere, which is even greater in distance, 190,000 kilometers from where we are, going up. To give you reference, the Earth is 40,000 kilometers in circumference. So if something is 190,000 kilometers above, then it's really high up. Okay, like more than you can possibly comprehend. And here in the, I think here around the thermosphere, about 100 kilometers, they say that's the Earth ends there, and its atmosphere ends about 100 kilometers from here to the sky. It ends there, and then the rest is outer. Well, I don't know if it's outer space, but it's space and outer space. So back to the conversation that these guys were having 4,800 years ago to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. The Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world, is about I think it's 800 meters, not a kilometer yet, right? The tallest structure we have on Earth is not a kilometer, okay? So these guys must have, they were like high on something really special, right? Because the confidence it takes to even start such a conversation. You know, some things like, but you see all of them were like, let's do it. We have the slime, we have the mortar, let's go. And they're saying they're going to build a tower that reaches, I think you can turn on the lights, the heavens. So these guys had crazy faith, but on top of that, they had what? Crazy imaginations. Right? And God was impressed. Well, not disappointed. He was impressed. He was like, wow, these guys I'm coming to see the city that they have built. And so he confounded the language, and he stopped that project for that time. But fast forward, 4,869 years later, 12th September 1962, something interesting is about to happen. Okay? Has anyone ever told you, I love you to the moon and back? You should have asked them, how did you get there? Can you explain to me how you got there? What did you even say to that? What did you say? You said, yeah. Because I would really like to know that love, right? So J.F. Kennedy gave a speech, and I think of all the things that mankind has done, I think this is the most intriguing. He says, we choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. A third time. We choose to go, just in case you didn't hear, like in case you are confused. He said it 3 times. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. In this decade. So he has a time, he has a place. And he says, and do other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And he says, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. It says, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept. And he goes on to say, one we are unwilling to postpone, And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure that man has ever gone. Wow. What a speech. Right? So this man, who was one of the youngest presidents of the US, something in him just convicted him to say, guys, we're going to the moon. Not in the future, not when I'm dead, but in this decade. It's like he's saying we're going to the moon today. Or rather, we are starting our plans to go to the moon today. And he says, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And the choice of language is so deliberate. I hope you see, we talked about the power of words. But even the words that he uses are so deliberate. We choose to go to the moon. No one told them to go. No one forced them to go. No one asked them to go. Just like where you want to go, no one will tell you to go. No one will ask you to go. You have to make that decision yourself. He says we choose to go to the moon. He says not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And he says we are unwilling to postpone. Because many people have imaginations and dreams that are just, they're on the rain check list. Take a rain check, take a rain check. Next year, next year, next year. But if I would even zero in on faith and the definition of faith, he says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for. That faith is a present moment experience. You don't choose to believe tomorrow. You believe now or it's not faith. Do you understand? You believe now. I'm going to be great. You believe it now. Don't say, let me finish school, then I will be great. Do you understand? So there's something about the words of J.F. Kennedy that is so inspiring. And to put it all in context, the moon is 384,000 kilometers from the Earth. Beyond the exosphere, beyond the heavens, the strato and the meso and the thermo. And he's gone and transcended and said, we're going to go somewhere literally out of this world. Okay? And he says this mission required 8 years of planning. Okay? And it took 10 practice mission runs and over 400,000 engineers. 400,000 engineers. That's bigger than any company that exists today, working on one project. Well, not bigger than any company that employs engineers, because Walmart has about 3 million. Just clarifying. So it says over 400,000 engineers, scientists, and technicians. And it says roughly $150 billion to make the first tentative steps on another planetary body. $150 billion for one project, just to achieve one dream, where one man woke up and said, guys, we're going to the moon. And they put everything to make it happen. So what's the difference between imagination and fantasy? It's what comes after. Do you understand? Because this could have been a fantasy. J.F. Kennedy one day in 1962, he woke up and said, we're going to the moon, but we haven't reached, That's a fantasy. But they got there. And he says, listen to this. He says, when they finally landed, there was only 30 seconds worth of fuel left on that craft. 30 seconds. Half a minute. They just barely made it. But this is what that quote said about imagination. It says, imagination includes the knowledge that we may have pain in obtaining our desires, but ultimately our desires are more powerful than our pain. That there was no obstacle big enough to stop them. They tried everything and they made sure it happened. And Neil Armstrong and Buzz, they landed on the moon. They put the American flag there. They put other things, okay? Because their imagination aligned and allowed them to do the impossible. Do you understand? So you could laugh at the people in Genesis 11. How are you going to build a tower? But man, we got to the moon. You understand? He said, Neil Armstrong in landing, he said, this is one small step for man, but one giant leap for mankind. To take over and to land in a place that's uninhabitable. You understand? Like, the magnitude of this project is impressive. I don't think there's anything like it. Some people say, well, there are things, really amazing things that men have done. The Panama Canal, for example, right? Connecting two oceans together. That's crazy. Like the things that men have imagined to do. Humans who were born just like me and you, right? But they employ their imagination to go beyond the familiar and the predictable to dare where no man has dared before. Do you understand? Right? The Manhattan Project, although that's not really a good one because they created bombs and bombed cities, but still, the fact that they were able to imagine things that could accomplish such, how did they do it? Have you watched Oppenheimer? Yeah. Right? So, let's continue. I've been told 10 minutes, but I don't know how. I imagine that we shall finish. So, guys, the sky is really no longer the limit. In fact, when I tell you, oh, do well, the sky is the limit. Say, no, not for me. Because we went beyond the sky. Do you understand? It's not the limit. It's not the limit. There's so much more where your imagination can take you. You can dare to do things that no one has done. You can find the cure for cancer if you imagine it. You can start the biggest crash, Cheyenne, if you imagine it. Whatever it is that you can conceive. In fact, it's interesting. The Hebrew word for imagination, yetzer, means conception. That whatever you imagine in your mind, it's like what happens when a baby is made. Do you understand? The action happens 9 months before when no one else is looking, but you see the results 9 months later. So where you will be tomorrow, we'll only know, or rather we'll know where your mind was at today by where you are tomorrow. Doesn't it say in Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinketh within himself, so he is. That you are where you are today because that's where your thoughts are. But you can change your thoughts, you can change your mind, you can become a better man, a better woman, you can make your contribution in the world because no one is limiting you except yourself. Do you understand? So look at what it says in Psalms 8, verse 3-9. It says, look at the splendor of your skies. Okay? And it says, your creative genius glowing in the heavens. It says, when I gaze and look at your moon and stars, he says, mounted like jewels in their setting, I know that you are the fascinating artists who fashioned it all. He's speaking to God. And he says, but I have this question to ask. He says, why would you bother with puny mortal man or care about human beings? In other words, you know what he's saying? He's saying, God, why do you care about us? When if he's asking that question, it means that God cares about us. But he's curious, why? Like we are only at a very small portion of the known universe. But why do you care about us? He's asking. And he says, yet what honor you have given to men. And he says, created only a little lower than Elohim. That's so powerful. The Bible says that you've been made in the image and likeness of God. You have been made only slightly lower. So powerful, okay? And he says, crowned with glory and magnificence. You, now, he says, God, he says, you have delegated to them rulership over all that you have made. Okay? And he says, with everything under their authority. Everything under your authority. Placing earth itself under the feet of your image bearers. We are the image bearers of God. We carry his image. And he says, all the created order and every living thing of the earth, sky, and the sea, the wildebeest and all that move in the parts of the sea, everything is in submission to mankind. So it's really up to you. Like, what do you want to do? Okay? And he says, Yahweh, O sovereign God, your glory streams from the heavens above, filling the earth with the majesty of your name. And he says, people everywhere, they see your splendor. Speaking of God's, how do you say, he's released everything. If JFK wants to go to the moon, he can go to the moon. If you want to go to Cork, you can go to Cork. Anywhere you want to go, you can go. Because he has given everything. Do you understand? And he says here in Romans 8:18, he says, I am convinced that any suffering we endure, because sometimes we go through things and we put them in juxtaposition to what our future would be like. But that's not the case. You're not determined or defined by what you experience externally. It's actually the driving force from within you that determines where you're going to go. So it says, I am convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing. What is less than nothing? Like, you know, the interesting language. Like, I am convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing. So he could have said, it's nothing, but it's less than that. That means there is no challenge, obstacle, experience that you have that is actually good enough excuse to not take you where you need to go, right? And he says, compared to the magnitude of glory that is about to be unveiled within us. So if you compare your circumstances and the glory that is unveiled within you, it says the circumstances are less than nothing. What keeps you up at night is less than nothing than the potential that you carry inside you. Do you understand? So it says the entire universe is standing on tiptoe, yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. The world is excited. Creation is excited, eager to see what you will do, what difference you will make on this earth, where you will choose and allow your imagination to take you. Creation is waiting. Do you understand? The whole universe is just, what is she going to do? What is he going to do? Eagerly, not in opposition, but in excitement. Do you understand? That you are the only one who can stand against yourself. You need to imagine yourself doing great things. You need to stop limiting and referencing your life to what you know and what is familiar to you. You'll go further than your parents. You'll go further than your siblings, right? Not to compare, but I'm just saying anyone who puts the power of imagination to good use will not regret it, and history will be kind to them. Do you understand? Because when you start to imagine great things, it's easy for people to laugh at you. But no record of anyone laughing at what JFK Kennedy said. It's only his speech, which now we are using to try and motivate you. But no one else. We can't remember what they said. Do you understand? Okay, I hope we're concluding. I really hope so. Yeah. So, in conclusion, what are we saying? We're saying no more ifs. Okay? No more, if all goes well, I hope to get married. If all goes well, I hope to get a job. If all goes well, I hope to finish school. That's all false humility. If you understand who you are. If you allow your imagination to take you. Can you imagine if JF Kennedy stood before millions of Americans and says, if all goes well, we might land on the moon. Please pray for us. No. Can't work like that. You have to be convinced within yourself. You have to be persuaded. Do you understand? Even if no one else believes, don't let your dreams die. Do you understand? Okay? So it says here, listen, very interesting story as we conclude. This is the last one I'm telling you. But I can see like you guys still want more. It says, it has often, so someone, a certain dad was having a problem with his child who was experiencing demonic possession, okay? And he says, so the man was speaking to Jesus, says, if it has often thrown him into the fire, or if it says, it has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. It says, but if you can do anything, listen to the word, it says, if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can do anything. Listen to Jesus' response. He says in verse 23, he says, if you can? Like, what? What do you mean, if I can? And some of us, that's how we talk to God. If God, you would help me this one time, I won't ask you again. If you just show me mercy this one time. But he says, he asks him, if you can. Almost a bit offended, like, bro, what? And he says, Jesus said to him, he says, everything is possible for one who believes. Wow. So no more ifs. Change your ifs into when. Say, in this decade, in this year, in this week, I'm going to walk in happiness. In this evening, I'm going to sleep well. I'm not going to have insomnia. In this very evening, I'm not going to miss the bus. Imagine the little and the large. So it says again in 23, it says, Jesus said, if, if, it's the same rendering, just a different version. It says, if, in fact, if anyone tells you like that statement, listen, guys, refuse the word if. It sounds harmless, but it sows doubt in your mind. When someone says, oh, if all goes well, says, no, when all goes well. So it says, if, and he says, there are no ifs among believers. Anything can happen. If you truly believe, there are no ifs. And there are no laters. All right? So finally, as we conclude, it says, Ephesians 3:20 says, never doubt God's mighty power to work in you and accomplish all this. He says, he will achieve infinitely more than your greatest request, your most unbelievable dream, and exceed your wildest imagination. It usually says, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can think, ask, or imagine. And he says, he will outdo them all, for his miraculous power constantly energizes you. The power of God is resident within you to help you accomplish and take you where your mind has already gone, where your imagination has taken you. Do you understand? If you see yourself at the top of the corporate ladder, the power of God is working in you to take you there. Do you understand? But if your imagination is not there, listen, things don't happen by chance or by coincidence. It's always deliberate intention. Do you understand? And so finally, Paul makes that wonderful statement in Philippians 4:13. He says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Listen, nothing is impossible. And he says again, all things are possible to them who believe. Listen, if you're able to believe, if you're able to imagine, if your mind is able to go there, your body will eventually get there. You understand? It transcends time, geography, anything. Don't limit yourself. Whatever thing that you are trying to do, just think, someone actually went to the moon based on imagination.